someone is compatible with them. We have the three major blood types plus an Rh factor, okay? And that's really important with women because if the woman is Rh negative and the husband is Rh positive, the IgG from the Rh group can cross the placenta. So if dad, it's always dad's fault. If dad gave baby genetically Rh positive blood, mom's antibodies could see baby as foreign and attack baby and kill baby, okay? But we can do some really nifty things called ROGAM. We can trick the body by giving the mom anti-D, and the body says, oh, I've already got these antibodies, I don't need to make it. And it will protect the baby and the mom from producing those so she can have other babies. So I like to ride motorcycles. I'm A positive. So if I were to get in an accident, you know what I mean, they'd be like, oh, Quinn's dying, let's give him blood. And they put blood into me and save my life. Now, red cells just do our blood, right, to help us breathe. But what if I'm bleeding more? And it's 5 units, then it's 10 units, then it's 18 units, then it's 84 units. Well, you can bleed out all your blood, right? We're not even putting your blood back into you. So then what we have here is the plasma. There's the actual clotting factors. We also have FFP and platelets, because platelets need to plug those holes. There's different things that we can do to save that. I didn't know in college that you could bleed out all your clotting factors, the chemical process to actually stop the blood. And those fancy tubes that are over there, there's anticoagulant in them to prevent that from happening inside of them. So, we have giant analyzers that help us do that, but we also have bench methods. So if this can't solve it, I can go back to my normal method, and I'm actually looking and shaking tubes, kind of like what you guys did on the cards. That's what we do. Both of these have to be QC'd, have to be validated, and all of that stuff, and checked every single day. Okay. And then we monitor our blood and just how we do our system washes and everything like that. Okay, so let's get back to your rule book, because I think I've described what I do as a medical scientist. Okay, to get there, medical laboratory assistant certification, you take 2 classes. You do urinalysis and phlebotomy, and you're basically like a CLA, and you have a certificate to go and be a medical assistant or phlebotomist. You can then apply to a program if your prerequisites are good, and you can do 2 years associates. It's all the stuff that we've covered. We go through microbiology, hematology, and all of that stuff. After you get done with that degree, you have to reapply for the 4-year degree, and you do an advanced method of that same teaching, okay? And you go a little more into depth. The difference here, too, is like I'm an MLS. You can work alone. You can be over departments and stuff like that, whereas here you have less responsibilities, if that makes sense. You're still doing the same work, but also here, like if you were to commit fraud, you know what I mean, you could go to jail, whereas you have less like risk as you go up throughout that. Within that, so what I did is the prerequisites. I applied for the medical laboratory scientist position, and I didn't have my chemistry done. And I was like, oh, I'll do it in that first semester with it, and they rejected me. So it took me 5 years to get through my 4-year degree, because I had to wait a whole year to reapply to the program, which kind of sucked. Okay. So there's on campus and there's online. So Weber State University is where I went to go get my degree. And what they do is they do the theory work, but we had simulation labs. On campus, we go in and we do testing, simulation testing. I actually worked for Weber State. And I would actually, in my junior and senior year, I would make up like the liver enzymes and the heart markers and stuff like that for the first and second year students that were coming through, and spike those so that they could do the testing. I'd also run all of the maintenance on the machines so that the kids could run their tests. Let's call them colleagues. All my colleagues could run tests. University of Utah, Brigham Young University, they do all their undergrad prereqs first. They apply to the program, and then they just do theory for 2 years. Nothing but studying, studying, studying. Then when they get done, they come to me, and they do rotations through the hospitals for about 6 months. They're just human slaves, you know what I mean? For my brain, I loved this, where I would learn about the blood bank, and I'd actually do blood bank work. Learn about blood bank, do blood bank work. It helped reinforce to my brain how to do it. University of Utah and BYU, Weber State puts out more medical scientists than those two combined. There is one more that is actually introducing this, so that's why it was kind of saturated up here. Weber State puts out a lot. That may have changed, but they do still do a lot. And that's why I ended up moving to Salt Lake for my degree. So prerequisites, once again, I said are needed to apply. Just caveats, there's long laboratories. There are many days where I would be up on campus, maybe until 8, 9 o'clock at night. I would get up early and be on campus, because especially when you're growing up organisms and stuff like that, you have to check on them and everything. I got to do research through Weber State University, and that was really hard. So we came up with a method that I was really proud of, and spent long hours up there. So once you get prepared and everything like that, and you're done with school, but even while you're in school, the requirements are kind of high, okay? So who wants medical scientists working on your stuff if they only get C's? Right? So what they say is they're like, hey, we need someone with a B average or better to do this. So if you fail a test, you get to retake that test once. And it's like a similar test, if that makes sense, similar things. If you fail that test, less than an 80, they'll give you one more chance to take a similar type test. You could be in your senior year, your last class, and you could fail that second exam, and they'd say, see ya, go pick a new major. Because it's kind of serious. Now I wanted to let you know, when I was sitting there, I was the most average student. I probably got a B+ in this class. I was still learning how I learned and how to keep track of everything. In college, I figured out a way to track my assignments and make preparation. So one of the things I want to say is, like, if I could do this, if you apply yourselves, truly figure out how you learn. I'm an artist, so when I went through school, I drew basically everything. Doing this lists and all these other things didn't really help me at all, so I learned how I learned and figured out how to do it, and I passed the test. Now it's an interesting test because as you take this ASCP test, at the very end, to get your certification, is a comprehensive test, so it covers everything, all those departments, and it gets harder as you take it. So if you answer a hard question, it gives you a harder question. And then when you answer that question right, it asks you a harder question. So I was like sitting in this test, and it's like a 3-hour test, and I'm like sweating bullets. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm failing this test. That's a good thing, because if it feels easy, that means that it's giving you easier tests. And that's why I have it at 60% for pass on that. After you pass this and you're actually in MLS, you have to do continuing education, and you do classes to prove that you renewed that every 3 years. Okay, so this is income and earnings. So like I said, like a lab assistant or medical laboratory assistant or phlebotomist, these numbers are kind of getting loosey-goosey within the recent economy. So these are close to being accurate, but maybe not like perfectly accurate. The nice thing about this field is you could get your certification and go work in a hospital and make some extra money. When I was working in the lab at the university, I was making $5.25 an hour. I was like, man, this sucks. I mean, I'd rather be making, and at that time it was like $11 or $10. I was like, man, I could be making $10 an hour if I was in a different lab. By the time I got my associate's degree, I was so close because it was offered as basically free. I didn't bother getting this because I was going to be so close to doing this, but when they offered the test for free, I was like, oh, I'll take the test. So I did that and got that accreditation, but no one wanted to hire me. They're like, Quinn, you're too close to being a bachelor. We don't have a place for you to land. And so, yeah. So when I started out, I was offered a job before I graduated. I think it was like $21 an hour. Just what my first job was, maybe 20 bucks an hour, somewhere around there. And that was before I even graduated, which was really nice to feel, to know I had a place to land.
Hey, Quinn, why do you have 49? It says 4920 in parentheses. What does that mean?
Yeah, so this has to do with so the upper tier, so if you, I'm an advanced medical laboratory scientist. Also, if you're a lead or if you were a coordinator, if you're over a department like I am, you might be able to get up into this upper range. So a generalist might be here. Also, this kind of is in connection with the next slide. Are you guys okay if I click it? Okay. Yeah. So I'll just talk about this, but you'll see it. So we work 24/7, right? So holidays, weekends, evening and grade differentials, all of that groups into that, and that can bump this pay up on top of that. Also, critical staffing, awesome. Critical staffing, so when I worked COVID redeployment. So I would work my normal day, my normal 8-hour day, and after work, I would go back to the central lab and I would do PCR during the COVID chaos and work another 10-hour shift. And then I would go to sleep and get back up and do that. I could only do that on weekends because my body just couldn't do it. And we had fleets of teams of people, highly well-oiled machine running those testing, doing that big time. So that's kind of where I was putting that. So supervisors, managers, and that's another thing. Supervisors and managers can go up into that upper tier as well. QA would be quality assurance or directors. Just to put this into perspective, because you can go into education. So I have been asked many times by Weber State to come back and teach. And so like directors and university professors might make up into here. And I can tell you with overtime and those holidays and stuff like that, after about 12 years, you can very much get into this category, if that makes any sense, depending on how much you're working. I've also worked PRN and worked for Heber and Riverton and stuff like that, because we'll get into that next. Well, in a little bit. So I'll cover it right now. Just a projection, we're understaffed in a lot of the areas that we're working in. Pre-professional, just like to run the doors, I want to make sure that you understand this. Education doesn't close doors, it can only open them, right? So when I was going into medicine, I wanted to be a dentist. And so medical laboratory sciences, I did the medical laboratory science degree. But along with it, I did all the prereqs to get into med school, dental school, and PA school to open doors, and I really enjoyed that. So most of my colleagues went into dental school, medical school. Some of them have gone over to genetic counseling. A lot of us went over to physician assisting. I've been headhunted by the field service engineers. So remember those analyzers have all those engineering components. They've asked me to do that. LIS is the computer side, like how the interface works. You could go back and get your PhD. There's a master's degree in medical laboratory sciences. You could even become a pathology assistant, teaching professor, LCMS for like those big drug conglomerates and research. So you see how this just opens your field, and if you don't like what you do, you can move to a different department or move to a different field. It just opens doors, and I really appreciated doing that and having that opportunity. Great question. So this is a little bit old, projected that it was going to increase by 11%. I'm one of the younger guys, if you believe such things, in my laboratory, okay? And that's kind of random to think about. When I did this last year, when I asked people to raise their hands, it was like 3 and 5% of the high school students were looking at medicine at all. So to see it change to now is kind of crazy. So due to that aging population, there's a lot of that leadership and people who are on the cusp within the next 10 years, or I guess where are we at, next 5 years, to retire. And we don't have the backbone to help those. Now variables obviously are technology, right? Automation, analyzers getting smaller and being able to do more, and then legislation, right? All like calibration and QC that I do is regulated by the government. If they were to change what we had to do, we might need more staffing. And I can tell you, I do a lot of the paperwork for all that stuff, and it's hard for me as an advanced medical laboratory scientist to do the work that I have to do with all my extra stuff and serve on the councils that I do. So I'm stretched really, really thin. And then just making sure that we have coverage for that. And heaven forbid anyone gets sick, right? Like COVID could take out half the workforce, you know, in one go. So. Okay, let's do a quick case study, okay? So what we had here is this is a young lady up at Primary Children's Hospital who was born with a mid-sagittal defect known as pulmonary atresia. This is where she needed a conduit, a bypass from her heart to her lungs. She was also born with a ventricle septum defect, which means they had to close a hole in her heart. And if you remember your anatomy with the heart, her ductus arteriosus was luckily reverse-oriented, so it shunted oxygenated blood to her brain, into her aorta. So They did, she unfortunately had a chylothorax where the lipids from the lymphatic system were leaking into her lungs and collapsed her lungs. So she had to go in and get that fixed. When they reamed her chest tube out, they found a whole bunch of blood coming out. So they sent down hematocrits, hemoglobins, her clotting factors, and contacted the transfusion services. They took care of that and treated her, and she's doing just fine. This is my daughter. So when I was going to go to dental school, I got waitlisted when she got sick like this, and I deferred with the University of Utah. And then I made just a life choice and said, no, I'm not going to go into dental school. But I have a great degree because I have all these opportunities ahead of me. A lot of my other colleagues, they got like zoology and like maybe biology degrees, not bad degrees. I just have a really good legacy career that I got to stay in and fall back on versus being stuck as like maybe a clerk or having to do research or whatever it was. So, questions? Nothing? Awesome. Well, you guys are great. Thanks.
Thanks, Quinn.
Thank you.
All right, I think he gave you guys ample information to be able to type up one-page report about medical lab sciences, okay? So submit that, please.